But I do want to talk, start with your book, and because it goes further than some of the conversations. So clearly, one of the conclusions you've reached comes close to what Charles Murray concluded, which is the best thing that you can do in losing ground. The best thing you can do is to end welfare as we know it altogether, and that will drive people to jobs by itself. So now that is in itself controversial. Can I just examine the contours of that? You presumably think that there ought to be some benefits for some things, because clearly some. So can you tell us what it is that you would keep then, before we understand?
I basically wouldn't keep categorical programs like food stamps that we have in the United States. What I would keep is the ability of people, or what I'd establish is the ability for people to earn a paycheck, and with that paycheck, pay for the housing allowances they're now getting. Instead, they get a paycheck. For the food that they're now getting from food stamps, they get a paycheck. That the idea would be to create a pool of jobs that would help the person become self-sufficient without the need of all of those programs. And people say, well, how can you be so mean? Well, this is terrible. How are you going to take it away? To me, work is a very important thing. In America, I don't know if it's true here, in America, work has become a four-letter word. Particularly on the left for liberals. Food stamps, which we have, which is giving allowances for food. Our Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, has told me and others that they want to put in work requirements for people who are on food stamps, which actually is part of our law. And the pushback from the left has been so great. How dare you ask people to go to work for a government benefit? Well, if they're capable of working and if there is a job, why should we have a problem with that? And I'm going to tell you something. Most of the people that we're dealing with don't have a problem with that.
So the interesting thing is you've encountered so many people who don't have work, who could have work, so you'll have a better fix on this than I did. We had a very interesting program. I don't know how many people in the audience saw it, in this country, called Benefit Street. It was a film about a street in Birmingham which had a lot of people on benefits, and some of them it was obvious they could work and they just weren't working. But the ones that interested me, it wasn't so much that he didn't want to work or that he couldn't work. It was a sort of weird combination of lack of empowerment. And when he did decide to get himself a job, which was as a kind of door-to-door salesman, he ended up not earning any money, and then he gave up and eventually went to a food bank. He didn't have it. What is your view about the proportion of people whom you encounter who are really not capable, for one reason or another, in the end, of adding much value to the economy, and therefore you can't pay them?
Who are not?
Yes.
Not many. I mean, what Lee and I have found. Let me give you an example of people who are mentally disabled, people who have lower IQs, for instance. We often were able to find those people jobs. It wasn't that they couldn't work. It was they weren't assisted in finding the right niche for them to be able to work. The same with people who are physically disabled. Many of them say, well, I really can't go out, I can't do it. The truth is you can work from home. And there are many jobs in which people can do customer service and other kinds of work at home now with the technology we have. So, yes, of course, I can give you an example of someone who's blind and mentally retarded, someone who has one limb, and sure, there are boxes where the likelihood is that person's not going to go to work. But Lee and I really do believe strongly that most people can work, that if they have something that assists them in not only finding the job, but in moving through from unemployment to employment, they can work. And our society is too quick to write off those people. They're too quick to set up the conditions whereby, again, people ask me, I've been on over 100 radio shows in the United States about my book, and I often get the question, well, the people really want to work. And I say, you know what the real problem is? The problem is our government setting up the conditions so that there aren't the incentives and there are disincentives for people working. It is less the people themselves or their abilities. So I feel very strongly, and maybe it's an optimism that I have. A friend once said of Peter Cove, if his house was burning down, he'd be thankful for the warmth. Well, I really am that optimistic. I really do believe things can happen, and they will happen for the better. So I believe most people can work.
Well, let's take the smaller category of people who, for one reason or other, they won't work. The biggest problem in poverty policy is then what happens to their children, right? So what is the right welfare benefit approach to people who won't earn themselves and their families a living?
I don't think there is a responsibility for government for someone who refuses to partake in the fruits of the society that they're in. I think if they refuse to do that, they're on their own.
But what about the kids? So this is the key. The key problem is somebody has children, 3 children, and they have the capacity to work, but they decide they're not going to. In a system in which there's no benefits, what happens to the children in those circumstances?
If that results in child abuse of some sort, in other words, if there's not enough food, or if the people are responding to the children in some way that is a reflection of that decision, then society has ways of dealing with that. And that is basically to take the children away from the parents. If the parent is going to make that kind of decision, that's fine. They can make that decision not to work. But if it's going to affect their children, then I think society has some role there.
Can I have another small thing that relates to children, and that is the question of childcare, which particularly affects obviously single parents, or you know, whether or not it should, female workers. What is your experience at America Works of that particular problem and how you encourage people to deal with it? Because one of the things that I think we've often discussed is that you found that people who have that problem don't appreciate their employer still needs them to turn up anyway. And that's teaching them that that's the case is one of your jobs.
Yeah, well, I mean, we work very closely with the people as we place them in jobs to let them understand what the responsibility is for going into that job and the responsibility to their family. And so daycare is very important, and in my proposal in the book, I build in the costs of that into the program so that daycare would be available to anybody that needed it, that was going to work and was participating in work. But you can't change attitudes.
Wouldn't that lead, though, to a massive daycare bill? Because obviously, or would it be means tested in some way? Or
no, the daycare bill actually would come out of the savings that we got from not having welfare and not having poverty programs. I built that in. I figured out how much, at least I made some guesses as to how much it would cost for the daycare in this program. And so the daycare would be available. It would not increase. My proposal is revenue neutral. In fact, we save some money with it, although I suspect some people would have some problems with certain parts of it where they want to put this amount more money in and that amount more money in. But right now, it really saves some money from what we're spending on welfare, daycare, and other things.
Let's then talk about America Works as a business and as an organization. It's easy for anyone to see what the government bureaucratic steps would be to prevent you from, and why that would happen, to prevent you using your company to replace people who have comfortable bureaucratic jobs and might not want it. But what are the who are the sorts of people politically and administratively who are buying into America Works? When you spot a certain type of person politically, who are they generally?
Okay, well, I'll give you 2 examples most everybody will know, which is President Clinton and our now Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, both of whom have spoken eloquently and often about America Works and what we do. I would say of them and others like them, I just want to mention them because they're people you might know, they're policy wonks. They're people who just, they think about policy. They don't come from ideology. They come, or if they do, it doesn't affect their thinking about what works and what doesn't work. And so it is generally people who take a hard look at what it is that's working and make a decision on that. Let me give you Arthur Brooks, who's head of the American Enterprise Institute. Some of you might know him. He has a way of suggesting how in our country conservatives and liberals present their issues. Conservatives present their issues through facts and through data and through what really is going on. Liberals do it through emotion. And emotion often trumps, pardon the term, it often trumps facts. So the politicians who really want to look at something, I mean, it's really what Lee and I have done. We've always wanted to make sure that what we're doing works. If they look at this and they say, is it working or isn't it working? That's all we really care about. Lee and I do a lot of work with the Manhattan Institute, which is a sister organization of the Policy Exchange. And what we do with them is we do research. They contract out the research, we run the programs. And an example, about 5-7 years ago, Lee and I asked a question. What do we know about recidivism to crime? What do we know? No, not what do we think. What do we know? And we found out we didn't know much. There was not a lot of research. So we encouraged the Manhattan Institute to get money to do a controlled experimental study on that issue, where we ran the program. Half the group got jobs, half the group didn't get jobs. We see what happened at the end. Surprise, surprise, of course. Work did reduce recidivism to crime significantly. In fact, some of the researchers were blown away by how much it did. We believe, as those politicians who like what we do, that you look at the facts. You look at what is really going on, not what would you like to see going on, not...
Well, so, you know, and I know we've discussed this before, so I sort of know the answer to this a little bit, but I think it's worthwhile discussing. One of the things that people talk about in relation to America Works is, you know, to what extent is that people who would be able to find jobs anyway, and you get them into work and get paid for it, and it's a sort of cream skimming. If you waited long enough, these people would get work anyway. How do you demonstrate that that's not how the scheme works?
Well, how do you demonstrate that is a couple of ways. First of all, we've taken a look, and researchers have taken a look at the welfare population that we place as opposed to the welfare population that's general. And it's the same. It's exactly the same. So if you look at it that way, but also it is very hard to know who's going to get a job right away. And it doesn't often have to do with their skills or their situation at the time. It has to do with many other things. But we believe strongly that you look hard at the people who are coming to you, and if they seem as though they're people who need a job, and I got to tell you, most of them do. I have to say, in Great Britain, the welfare experience during the first phase was that not too many who probably could have got a job anyway got a job. I mean, most of the people who got jobs were people who probably could have got a job anyway. At least that's what the research showed. That's really not the case with America Works. But the answer is pretty simple. Government pays us. You tell us who you want us to take. And if you think those are the people that are the least likely to get into the workforce, those are the people we'll take. The beginning of welfare reform in the United States, they told us you can only take women who are been on welfare for at least 3 years and haven't basically worked much. And you know something? They were the most employable people because they had better education than the people who were younger. They had run families. They had run budgets. They were more employable. But I say to the government, you tell us who you want us to take, and we'll take them.
Okay, tell us what you do for a business and for an individual who's looking for work. How does it work?
People come to us either referred by government agencies or on their own voluntarily. We then assess them, mostly for their capabilities. And then we have a staff of salespeople. Think of us like Manpower Inc. Kelly Services. They go out to companies, they look for job openings, they come back, and we match the people to those jobs. The people then go out, they're interviewed by the company. If the company likes them, they then go onto their payroll, and they stay there until forever, hopefully. Most of our people that we place succeed, and I'm going to tell you why. There are 2 reasons why programs haven't succeeded in the United States. One of them, I told you, was education and training being the first thing. The other one was that the government has not paid for performance. Up until recently, and Lee and I put this in so the government would do it, You pay for the results, not for the process. You pay for whether or not the person got a job and stayed in a job and got off welfare or other dependency payments, or they didn't. They don't pay us for a program. They don't pay us for our teachers. They don't pay us for our classroom. They don't pay our salaries. They pay us only for results, which I believe very strongly makes for a difference in whether or not any program works. In this particular instance, welfare reform.
I just want to ask one last thing before I throw it open, and it is a bit of a broader question. So this kind of program and the sort of politics that you espouse and are interested in, a bit like me, it's how we became friends, is all about a kind of evidence-based, very pragmatic approach where, to some extent, it's concerned about the questions that the left is interested in, poverty and how you get people into work and how you build families with decent incomes at the low end of the scale. To some extent, it's interested in what the right is interested in. It's about how you challenge bureaucracy with creative ideas. So in other words, it's a kind of non-partisan idea that lives in the realm of practice and requires a sort of broad support. Is the tide going out for that sort of politics in America? It's certainly, we've worried about whether that's the case in Britain. Because you've got this incredibly partisan atmosphere, and people will label ideas and they're not interested in dealing with it. Do you find the political environment now that may have existed with Bill Clinton and may have existed with Mayor Giuliani or with Bloomberg does not exist in a situation where you have Trump and de Blasio? It's beginning
to get like that. I have a quote I just want to read to you by Saul Bellow, the great novelist. He said, "A great deal of intelligence can be invested in ignorance when the need for illusion is great." And that's what we have going on. There's a need for the illusion that what has happened before is not a good thing. That it's been too mean and basically not the right thing for people. We haven't been kind and gentle to the people that are there. And yes, there is that. Our mayor in the city of New York, well, certainly under Dinkins, under Dinkins, before Giuliani, well, we had anybody want to go on welfare? They used to call the welfare commissioner, "Come and get it, Ginsburg." You know, it was just anybody that wanted the money, come on in. Following that, in the Obama administration, there was an easing of the rules for work participation and people going into work. In fact, the Obama administration came into New York and told us we couldn't place people on food stamps into jobs, even though it was the law of the land. So there is that going on right now. I actually am not sure where it's coming from, because we've been so successful in the United States with welfare to work. Senator Monahan had predicted that there would be women and children starving in the streets. Never happened. We really have done a good job of it. There are other things wrong with it, of course, but were there things wrong with the welfare policies before? My God, yes. We need to look carefully, again, at what works. We need politicians who are willing to do that rather than come at it with ideology.
Good. Well, look, now's the chance, hopefully, for those people who are here who come to listen today to ask your questions. And who would like to start? The gentleman in the front here would like to start. We've got a few people already.
My name's Chris Belk from the Conservative Transport Group, affiliated to but not under the control of the Conservative Party. A quick observation and then my question. When you were talking about disability and putting people in jobs, when I go to the Waitrose to go shopping, and I see the guys they've got collecting trolleys around from the car park, who are clearly mentally disabled to a degree, but who clearly enjoy giving a service, and you get a tremendous pleasure when you say thank you to them because they smile so some things like that clearly can work. The thing that I would like to draw everybody's attention to was an article in the Financial Times yesterday called "Why Are We Clever? DNA has nothing to do with it." And 2 sentences. children from the same family are treated so differently from each other, it's almost as if they might have come from different parents. Lip service is paid by politicians to the early years informing us. All three main parties mouth platitudes about the need for early intervention, but once in power, they invest in vanity projects, not initiatives to alter the quality of early care and life, family life. And then later on they say, if you look at all the various measurements, Scandinavia has done remarkably better than the UK and the United States by taking that approach to early life.
The question?
Well, the point is, why is that not a policy to be adopted?
Well, it has been adopted in the United States in terms of early childhood education, for instance.
Well, there's a lot of dimensions to this.
Oh, no, sorry. Yes, keep going.
No, what we found, and I'm going to have to say in the United States, I call it the welfare industrial complex. What we have are organizations that are funded that are supposed to carry out. Head Start is a perfect example in the United States. Program started at the War on Poverty when I started, but it's been executed by organizations that really don't have the capacity to do the work. You know why that happens? I'm going to tell you exactly why that happens. Because we had a woman who was in the state legislature in New York come to visit our program, America Works. And after she saw it, I said, do you like it? Are you going to support it? She said, no, I like it. It's the best welfare to work program I've ever seen. It's better than anything. She said, but I'm not going to support it. I said, why? She said, well, there's a small little program down the street from my campaign office. She said, on election day, they bring out the votes. She said, they're not as good as you, they're not as big as you, but they bring out the votes. What has happened is, and this is an indirect answer to your question, I know, but we have tried that. But the way in which we've tried that has been despicable.
Hang on, we can't. We've got so many, sorry about that. Just a moment, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Thanks very much for your remarks, Peter. I'm Frank Sedin from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. I was just interested in the idea of kind of work first, and Danny kind of touched on it in terms of value, which is, what's your view about wages? Because if kind of poverty is basically being able to kind of cover your basic costs, and you're kind of dealing with people who maybe have not been working for a long time, they're probably going to get jobs right at the bottom of the jobs market. And does that kind of lead you into kind of minimum wage policy, or as, for instance, we do in this country and partly in the US, into kind of subsidizing jobs as well, so that actually people are earning enough that they can pay for the things that they need?
Yes, I mean, it's a hot topic right now. In the United States, we have something called the Earned Income Tax Credit. And what that does is if you're working but not earning enough money, the government sends you back money. I'd rather see that kind of policy than have a kind of an altering of the marketplace. To me, the issue is an important one. Some of the people are not earning enough money to move themselves out of poverty. But having something like an earned income tax credit rather than a minimum wage, to me, is important and a better way to go about it. And I have a way of restructuring that in my book, which would really bring in a lot of people who currently can't get it in the United States.
Oh, the lady there, actually. And then this June.
Hi there. Thank you so much for speaking today. I had a quick question. It spoke to more of the illusion point that you made. I'm a student in the United States at Hillsdale College in Hillsdale, Michigan. And I was curious what your thoughts would be if a young American liberal student who is post-graduate or undergraduate is struggling to enter the workforce. So obviously this isn't more of a welfare question, but there seems to be a sense of this is where the problem starts to root itself, is in young American students who graduate and they're searching for jobs and are eager to go into the workforce because they have bought into the education and training, and they struggle to find that. So I was curious what your response would be to something along those lines.
Not an issue I dealt with in my book, and it frankly is not really an issue I've dealt with America Works and other programs I've worked with. But I would say this, I found it interesting that liberals in the United States who always said people should go to college are now beginning to say maybe everybody shouldn't go to college. Maybe there are other places you can go. You really can make more money in the United States being a plumber than coming out of college in most cases. So the issue maybe has something to do with how we guide people, what professions they go into. But as for all the people that are graduating from college and having trouble finding jobs, I think that's a real problem for our education system and our economy, and I don't see people really dealing with it.
Hi, thank you for your talk today. My name is Thomas Sweetman. I'm formerly of Policy Exchange several years ago, now of Mutual Ventures and specialising in public service reform. So this is something close to what I'm interested in. I'm interested in your diagnosis of the problem and your view of competing solutions, because obviously the next generation of welfare solutions takes place in a context where we have the left proposing things like universal basic income, and you're promoting almost something on the other end of that. With regards to the first point, though, if the 22 trillion did not move the needle in a positive direction, did it have any value in preventing it going in a negative direction? And that's just an open question to yourself. And then your second is, what is your view of something like the universal basic income as a solution?
Well, in the first place, I'm not sure how you prevent it from going the other way. I haven't really dealt with that issue except to feel strongly that if you're providing people with work rather than all the other things that we're providing them with, that it won't. As for the universal, you know, when I was in Bellagio, I was reading the book on, it was called In Our Hands, and it proposed the universal income, and I went, wait a second, this is nuts, this is crazy. What are we going to do? Take money and just give it to people so they don't work, or so they, I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Why not just, and it helped me to get my ideas of how to go about reforming what we have, which is why don't we take all that money and create the jobs rather than just handing the money out to people to stay home or whatever. So I really do not like the idea. Charles Murray proposed it in his book In Our Hands. I have great respect for Charles Murray. He, as Danny said, he wrote and analyzed the original poverty programs and had it, and welfare, had it down perfectly. But in this instance, I think the solution he comes out with is not a good solution, and I'm terribly opposed to it.
Hi, Philip Collett from Goals UK. We're a social enterprise, and I've been working in the welfare to work sector for 30 years in the UK. First question, have you told the government that the new work and health programme's not going to work?
Yes.
Okay. And secondly,
but they don't listen.
DWP, as it previously was Employment Services, now Job Centre Plus, were a long time ago working closely with the clients. They then decided that they wanted to sub it out to these big primes, so it went to the work programme. That hasn't worked. Now they're taking a lot of that back in-house, and they're the same staff. And I don't think it's going to work this time either.
No, it's not.
So what's the solution?
Well, the first thing is they might want to talk to some of the people who are on welfare and just ask them what they want and see what they need. And then I talk to the private sector and say to the private sector, what do you need? What is it you really need? And when they get the answers to that, and it's done in a broad-based way, they may begin to come up with something rather than the medical solution they've come up with now, which is like, I used to work for a foundation, and every week someone would have a new idea for something. Oh, I've got it. Why don't we try this? Let's see if this works. Without anything regarding reality or talking to people or trying to figure out, as Danny was talking about, what in fact really did work. What we've done worked. It's not the only way, but it is a way that works. And while the government looked at it and said, well, we think we should look at this and maybe try it, the way they went about doing it was destined. And Lee wrote a memo maybe 7 years ago to Danny saying, this is going to fail. This is totally going to fail. And she was absolutely right.
Hi. Two questions, and the first is about incrementalism. It's about real politics and how to move from from the current situation, where there is this very strong emotional reaction to these sorts of proposals, where you have cuts to child benefit, and it drops dead in the water. And I suppose so. The question is, how do you move from the current situation to what is quite an extreme position? And are there any proposals you'd have for how do you move in that gradual way towards this sort of proposal? And then the second question is about, you're talking about taking money and putting it into creating jobs. I suppose the emotional issues that people see are in that frictional space of you lose a job and then you've got 3 months, 6 months of being without work. And people who have got dependents and they find it difficult to move into another job, that's 3 to 6 months of having no money. And the other frictional part of it is is geography. There may be jobs out there, and so you're trying to create jobs, but where? Where to create the jobs, in what area, and who decides, and how does that work exactly?
In the answer to your first question, the incrementalism in terms of my proposals, the first would be what I've suggested that Paul Ryan, Speaker of the House, has suggested, that we have work requirements for all public benefits, that for anybody who can work and for whom there's a job, they should be working. That would be a first one. That could help us to move toward my proposals, which are much more broad in the extreme. As for your second question, what was it?
So if you're taking away all benefits...
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. In my proposal, the money is there to create jobs in the private sector. If there aren't enough jobs in the private sector, the money's there to create the jobs in the public sector for all people who would otherwise have been dependent on the government. So if a person had lost a job in the private sector, there would be a public job there for them until they could move back into the private sector, always with the objective of the person working in the private sector, but using the public sector as a backup.
Back. The gentleman right in the corner, and then...
Hello, Bonnie Trimble, freelance. With the sort of rise of a high skills economy, how feasible is it to get people with little training, little education into these jobs, with fewer low skills jobs, particularly with the rise of automation in various fields, such as, I know in America trucking is one of the big industries that looks like it might be under threat. And how will your company look to avoid this becoming an issue?
Well, I got a couple of answers to that. The first is that in 1900, agriculture was 40% of the economy in the United States, and within 10, 20 years, it was down to about 3%. And people say, where are the jobs going to be? Who's going to work? They were replaced with all kinds of other jobs, many of which same people could go to work in. For instance, what do we do at America Works with someone who's coming out of prison? They've been there for 7 years. They have a 6th grade education. What do you do with that person? And I'll tell you what you do in this kind of economy. We put them in the back room of customer service. Some of these guys, mostly coming out of prison, are great BSs. They really can talk their way through anything. And you put them on the phone and have them answering questions and selling things to people in Des Moines, Iowa. They're real good at it. So there are the jobs. You just have to find them. We have never found ourselves in a position where there were not enough jobs. We've had much more problem with the government having people come to us and go to work.
Yes, I think you've partially answered my question, because it was to do really with the rise of artificial intelligence and robots and things like this. I think there seems to be a consensus that in the not too distant future, this will take away millions of jobs. So that must affect your program. But the thing is, it's not going to hit the sort of blue collar workers, but actually millions of white collar workers. For the first time, people who have degrees, PhDs and so on will also be affected. So the question is, you know, you've got a program which relies on unemployed people having work to go into. What happens if the work isn't done? And there's always a lag phase between the sort of technology we're getting now and actually the new jobs arising. So what's going to happen to your program in the short and medium term?
People usually don't know what the next new jobs are going to be. You really don't know that. You don't know what the effect of artificial intelligence is going to be, except it's going to be dramatic. There's no question about that. But what jobs are going to be created out of that? What jobs are going to be there? They're not necessarily going to be just people who are technically trained. There are going to be lots of other things. I mean, picking up garbage is picking up garbage. Going to a person's house and providing care when they're elderly is going to be there, and as our societies get older, there's going to be more jobs like that. There are a number of areas where there will be jobs, and then there are all kinds of areas where I can't predict what's going to happen. But you know what happens in the private sector? In the private sector, where there's a need, it gets filled. And the need will be that there'll be lots of people who will be available for labor. And the private sector will figure out some industries where they can put those people into, where they will be successful and make money for the company. I'm not that worried about it, but again, I'm an optimist.
Big shirt.
Thanks for your presentation. I'm a dual citizen, have lived here for about 20 years. I'm involved, I work with one of the largest social housing, public housing providers in the UK. The question is, why, and I guess it's a question, Daniel, for you as well. Why is it, despite many surveys that indicate people want to be part of the productive economy one way or the other, why is it that this notion of working has gotten sort of demonized?
You know, I've been asking myself that question because I've seen it. So it's very obvious to me that that has happened. Why it's happened is not fully clear to me, except, you know, we have swings. You know, the pendulum goes both ways. We had this phenomenal success with welfare reform in the United States. Now we have people who are in political positions that don't want to see it any longer as it is. They want to change that. I don't, Danny, have you got a good answer for that?
Yeah, well, I read it, Libby Purvis, my colleague on the Times, wrote a really interesting article about the effect of mass unemployment in the Thatcher era on the debate about employment. And what happened was, because during that period there literally weren't enough jobs for people who wanted to do them, it's then been considered that to argue that there are jobs, but people just aren't doing the jobs, is to stigmatize people who actually just are unemployed because they can't find work. And it's become the idea that people claim benefits when they could be working is regarded as a very right-wing assertion. I remember meeting somebody, and they worked for university, and happened to be coming to my parents' house for a Friday evening and Sabbath, and I was chatting with her, and she was kind of amazed by my suggestion that there's a benefit problem, which is at a certain level, it won't be worthwhile the person going to work. And she said, well, why wouldn't they go to work? You know, of course people want to work. And I said, well, yes, because you work in the diversity unit of University College. But if you were in charge of, if you were a postman, and I said you can get paid exactly the same amount of money for working 1 round or 2, how many rounds do you think you'll deliver? Right? So this is a question that obviously not occurred to her. In other words, I think it's not so much that work is demonized, but it is suggested that there's something ridiculous to argue that people who could work might not do so. When it's obvious that if you provide someone with an incentive not to do so, or you enable them not to do so, and in fact also if you don't help them overcome their natural feelings that they can't do so, it's all a muddle of feelings, right? That notion is considered to be very a sort of very right-wing thing to say to someone when it's plainly correct. So I think it's not the idea that it's what you're saying about people that's being demonized rather than work, I think.
I just also want to add to that, in I think it was 1983, Pope John Paul II wrote an encyclical on work, which I'd really recommend to anyone. I'm Jewish, but I went off the reservation and started reading that in 1983. And what he said, and I'm going to paraphrase, but what he said was, if you deny a man work, you deny them part of their spirituality. And what he was really saying, well, I'm not going to say what the Pope was saying, but what I believe he was saying is work empowers you to be the person who you fully can be in a society, to your children, to your spouse, to the community around you, and to yourself. It really gives you a sense of self-worth. So it isn't always an economic decision, although that has to be part of it. But part of it is, who am I in our society? Who will I be when I die? And to me, that is very important, and we have to think about that for people. And when I see the government not giving the incentives and putting disincentives in the way for people, it really, really bothers me.
I've got time for one more question.
It's not really a question, but more a comment, I think, on that point, because I think it touches on what this young lady here said, because I think part of the issue is the conflation of two separate things. One to do with the people that you're talking about who may well be able to work but can't, and one to do with the problem of the emergence of a mass graduate population into an economy in which there aren't enough graduate jobs. So there are people who feel that there is a stigma about being forced into work because they have a very high level of the work that they want to do and they think is there, and if they're not getting that, they think that's a problem. Then those people are by definition privileged and capable of making that opinion known, and then are articulating that about people actually much lower down the socioeconomic scale who are keen to work, and they're assuming and ascribing to them the same sets of values and problems. So I think all the stuff you talked about I think is very interesting, but I think one of the political issues is created by that emergence of a kind of graduate class for whom there aren't enough jobs dominating the discourse and preventing actually a proper conversation about what's going on in the lower end where we're failing in technical and vocational education.
But in the lower end, there's the liberal position is that people shouldn't have to go into what they call hamburger flipper jobs. Even if the job's there, they shouldn't be required to go into those kinds of jobs, even if they're going to be making enough money through government support and other things to survive. So I think it's not just at the upper end. I think it's at the lower end for different reasons. What I see is people on the left in the United States demonize basically people who are poor by saying that they do not have to go to work because that's not a job worthy of them. Again, one of the answers to the question before about are there going to be enough jobs, it goes to the issue of immigration. And I don't want to get into the issue of immigration. We haven't got time, and I wouldn't want to anyway. But basically, there are an awful lot of jobs that are taken in the United States by immigrants that can be jobs that could be taken by people who are publicly dependent at this point.
Okay, well, I'm afraid that's all we have time for today, but I just wanted to say it's always a pleasure to be with Peter and to listen to him, and I always learn something, which I definitely did today. We had terrific questions, which I know is the polite thing to say normally, but we actually did.
They were on point.
So thank you very much indeed to all of you in a genuine way as opposed to the normal formal way. I enjoyed that very much. I hope you all did too.
Thank you for doing it.